Hi everybody, I have a pumpkin pie recipe to share with you today. I am using the Martha Stewart cookbook for the pie crust and for the pumpkin pie recipe. So the first thing you want to do is preheat your oven to 425. I'm using 1.5 cups of flour. I am modifying the recipe a little bit. I'm using 1 stick of butter. This is already salted. And I'm using a teaspoon of brown sugar, which the recipe doesn't call for. You don't want to add too much salt since if you are using salted butter, you don't want to add too much salt. And you want a little bit of ice water just to help incorporate all of those ingredients. You want to keep this whole thing pretty cold, and you don't want to mix in your butter too much if you want a flaky crust. Now, I don't have any vegetable shortening, so I'm using a little bit of oil, and the recipe calls for 3 tablespoons, but I'm only using 1. The last thing we want to do is roll it out, and I'm using a little bit of wax paper to help me along with this. And I'm also on a granite countertop, which means that my dough is going to warm up pretty quickly. So you might want to chill your dough before you roll it out. And I just want to make sure that I have enough dough to fill the interior of my dish. And once I know that I do, then I can go ahead and flip the whole thing over. So using wax paper for this is also a little bit easier. At this point, the dough is pretty warmed up, so I stuck it in the freezer for about 10 minutes just to cool it down a little bit more so I could remove the wax paper. And now I'm just going to tidy up my pie crust and put it back in the freezer while I work on the filling. I also got this recipe from the Martha Stewart cookbook, and you can find the recipe and more pictures on my website. So you need 3 eggs. Now the recipe calls for them lightly beaten, but I put all of the ingredients in together. I also use less sugar, but I recommend using the full amount of sugar because it wasn't quite enough. And I added a little bit of vanilla, which the recipe does not call for. I'm also using some organic pie puree that I picked up from Trader Joe's. And the last thing that I'm going to add is a little bit of pumpkin pie spice. I'm using this mix that I also picked up from Trader Joe's rather than using the individual spices that the recipe calls for. The last thing we need to do is just give it a good mix, and once it's all incorporated, then I can add that to our crust, which has been chilling for these last few minutes. And then with the little bit of extra pie crust that I had left over, I'm going to use this leaf cookie cutter to make a couple of leaves that I thought I could put on the side of the crust, but then I decided not to, and I just left them on a separate pie tray. You want to bake this for 15 minutes at 425 and then drop down the temperature and bake it for another 20 to 30 minutes. And I just put those little leaves right on top of the pie, and it was really delicious. This is almost healthy for you. This works along really wonderful